On the 15th of July 2022, in the Portuguese town of San Miguel do Rio, 6-year-old Emilia Silva disappeared. She was playing on the beach right by the water, just a few meters from her parents. At 4:20 in the afternoon, only a small footprint on the wet sand and a yellow plastic shovel remained of her. July 15th, San Miguel do Rio, a quiet coastal town in northern Portugal. The day was clear, about 27 degrees warm. The family beach was calm and sparsely populated. Antonio and Leah Silva came here with their daughter Emilia. The family settled about 10 meters from the water. Emilia was playing right at the water's edge, holding a small plastic shovel in her hands. At 4:20 in the afternoon, the parents suddenly realized that Emilia was no longer in their sight. Antonio was the first to look up from his phone and began searching for his daughter with his eyes. Leah, who was reading a book, noticed Emilia's absence almost simultaneously. Later, the police would note the difference in their testimonies, about 2 minutes discrepancy in time. At this moment, neither parent yet realized how important these 2 minutes would be. On the wet sand next to the water remained a clear footprint of a small bare foot. There were no other clear prints. The sand around was quickly trampled by adults rushing to help. The police also noticed a shallow groove, as if something had been dragged across the sand toward the water. What exactly this was could not be determined. The object was never found, and later it stopped being mentioned even in police reports. Emilia's shovel lay next to the last footprint, but there was no damage on it. The patrol arrived approximately 10 minutes later. The officers began searching and soon discovered a piece of blue fabric on a bush 20 meters from Emilia's tracks. The fabric immediately aroused suspicion. A teenager who was often seen on the local pier had a similar windbreaker. The police decided to pay careful attention to this evidence but did not rush to conclusions. That same day, the investigation also paid attention to other people. One of them was Luis Martinez, unemployed, 27 years old, spotted the day before not far from the beach. The second figure was a local fisherman, 53 years old, with minor criminal episodes in the past. In the morning, he was seen with a fishing rod on a neighboring rock. However, by the time of Emilia's disappearance, he had presumably already left. Twilight in San Miguel do Rio comes around 9:30 in the evening. The evening quickly plunged the beach into darkness. The search continued by flashlight, becoming increasingly tense and silent. There were no journalists or casual passers-by. Emilia's parents stood almost motionless in the same place where they had last seen their daughter. Leah looked at the sand under her feet, Antonio at the sea. The search lasted several hours, but no new traces were discovered. Then, at 11:55 in the evening, one of the volunteers, a professional diver who was examining the rocks, reported a find. He was standing on a ledge of Ventus rock, approximately 400 meters from the place where Emilia disappeared. Getting there without special equipment is practically impossible. The volunteer noticed an object between the rocks, which in the darkness he could not immediately recognize with complete certainty. The information was immediately passed to the police. Official confirmation of the discovery had not yet been received. Law enforcement decided not to inform the parents about this. Giving hope at this moment seemed too risky. Police officers moved closer to Ventus Rock and continued examining the territory, trying to keep the find secret from outsiders. Silence was again established on the beach, broken only by short police commands and the sound of the surf. The first day of Emilia's disappearance was coming to an end in tense anticipation. None of those present said aloud what everyone already suspected. After midnight, when it became known what the diver had discovered near Ventus Rock, the police intensified investigative actions. By 2 o'clock in the morning, detectives were carefully studying all the details that could shed light on this incident. The first to be in the center of attention was the local fisherman spotted nearby on the day of Emilia's disappearance. Why was the fisherman denying his presence on the beach if the cameras of the Casa Marinero bar could record his whereabouts? The Casa Marinero bar is located just above the beach, approximately 700 meters from the point where Emilia was last seen. The establishment's owners themselves offered the police to view the camera recordings. Video surveillance was conducted in standard quality. The recording clearly shows the suspect entering the bar at 3:40 in the afternoon and taking a place at the counter. He calmly drinks coffee, talking to almost no one. At 4:05 in the afternoon, the man pays for the drink, which is confirmed by the cash receipt and the cash register tape. He leaves the establishment exactly at 4:12 in the afternoon. This is recorded by the camera directed at the entrance. The police reviewed the recording several times, carefully recording all the fisherman's actions, his every movement. There were no doubts left. The man was indeed in the bar at this time and left there at the indicated time. But why then did he claim during the initial interrogation that he was not in the beach area that day? This aroused suspicion among the investigators. It was important to find out how much time the man would need to cover the distance from the bar to the beach where Emilia disappeared. The police checked this section of the route several times. Along the sandy and rocky path, an ordinary adult person covers 700 meters in approximately 10 minutes. The fisherman left the bar at 4:12 in the afternoon, and Emilia disappeared exactly at 4:20 in the afternoon, an interval of only 8 minutes. This meant only one thing. Even if he had been in a great hurry, he would not have physically had time to reach the scene of the incident. The calculations were unambiguous and left no doubt. This greatly weakened suspicions regarding the fisherman, but the police did not rush to completely exclude him from the investigation. The detectives decided to conduct an additional inspection of the suspect's boat, which was moored at the pier nearby. Around midnight, the police were already searching the small vessel when one of the investigators noticed a rolled-up rag with blood traces lying in the stern section. The investigators carefully extracted it, understanding the full seriousness of the find. An express analysis was conducted right on the spot to immediately exclude or confirm suspicions. The result was unexpected. The blood belonged to an Atlantic mullet, a common commercial fish in these parts. Thus, the bloodied rag had no relation to the case and was a random coincidence. This circumstance finally crossed out suspicion against the man, although it initially looked extremely suspicious. Despite the collapse of the main suspicion, the question remained unresolved why the fisherman denied his stay on the beach. The police conducted another brief interrogation, during which it turned out that he was afraid of attracting unnecessary attention. The man had previously had problems with the law and preferred to hide his presence on the day of Emilia's disappearance, hoping to avoid unnecessary troubles. Meanwhile, already after 2 o'clock in the morning, technical experts were carefully studying the site of the find made by the diver on Ventus Rock. Clear traces of foreign fingerprints were discovered there on one of the large stones. This strengthened police suspicions. However, soon the experts reported that these prints definitely did not belong to the fisherman. A new person appeared whose identity needed to be urgently established. This became an unexpected problem, pushing the fisherman into the background. At 2:40 in the morning, the police officially confirmed that the object found by the diver was indeed Emilia. The official statement was brief, and details were not disclosed, but it became clear what exactly was discovered among the rocks. The parents were informed about this carefully and without details. They had to remain in place and not interfere with the investigation's work. Complete silence again descended on the beach, broken only by the voices of police officers and the sound of waves. The investigation was at an early stage, but an important part of the path had already been covered. The fisherman, who initially seemed to be one of the main suspects, now completely fell out of law enforcement's field of vision. On the morning of the next day, the police prepared to completely exclude the man from the list of possible culprits. The verification of video from bar cameras, cash register documents, and results of the boat inspection were entered into the official investigation protocol. The alibi of suspect number 1 was confirmed fully and unconditionally. Now the police's attention was directed to a new trail. Unknown fingerprints found on a stone near the place where Emilia was discovered. It was necessary to urgently establish the identity of the owner of these traces. Whoever it was, he became the central object of the next stage of the investigation. Meanwhile, parallel to this direction of work, the police began to study the personality of Luis Martinez more deeply. The unemployed man, who was initially noticed nearby, now attracted attention much more seriously. The police decided to carefully study his personal connections and movements on the day of Emilia's disappearance. The first suspect was officially removed from consideration. Now began another, much more complex and delicate part of the investigation. After official confirmation of the find at Ventash Rock, the police changed the angle of investigation. Now, special interest was aroused by details of the private life of Antonio and Lia Silva, Emilia's parents. One of such episodes was an unusual bank transfer to Antonio's account 2 days before the incident. 2 days before Emilia's disappearance, her father received 5,000 euros on his bank account. The sender was listed as Mariana Fernandez, an elderly resident of Spain. The investigators had to find out the reason for the transfer. Documents provided by the bank showed that the transfer was made by 68-year-old Mariana Fernandez from the city of Vigo. The transfer comment read, "Para ferias," for vacation. It soon became known that the sender was Emilia's grandmother on her mother's side. However, the parents had not previously mentioned this money to the police. This looked suspicious, and the investigators decided to interrogate the Silva spouses again. They were interested in why the family decided to hide this fact from the police. During the interrogation, Antonio looked tense. He explained that he did not report the transfer because he did not want to attract unnecessary attention from neighbors. According to him, he did not want to look like a person living at the expense of relatives. Lia confirmed her husband's testimony. She remained calmer, but also admitted that she would not have told strangers about this transfer. The police accepted the spouses' explanations as plausible, but decided to check another version. The version was obvious. The police had to make sure that this money was not part of some blackmail or ransom. To verify the version, the investigators promptly contacted Emilia's grandmother. The communication took place via video link. The woman confirmed the origin of the money and provided all documents confirming the transfer. She explained that the money was a gift to the family for organizing summer vacation and had no other meaning. Thus, the version of blackmail or ransom was completely excluded. This trail was officially closed, but it left an unpleasant feeling among the investigators. Simultaneously with this, forensic examination of objects found near Emilia at Ventash Rock continued. Experts were able to extract DNA of an unknown man. However, no matches were found in police databases. This greatly complicated the investigation's work. Nevertheless, an important fragment was discovered on one of the stones. A partial fingerprint. This fingerprint was already in the police database. 2 years ago, it was recorded during a bicycle theft in the same city. The person involved then was Luis Martinez, the same unemployed man who had been seen earlier near the beach. Luis's name was officially mentioned for the first time in the investigation materials. The police immediately began checking his movements on July 15th from 3:30 to 5 o'clock in the evening. Confirming his whereabouts during this time period became critically important. The investigators questioned neighbors and acquaintances of the Silva family, trying to find out whether Luis knew any of them personally. It turned out that he periodically appeared near the area where the family lived. However, nobody recalled any direct contacts with them. The police simultaneously began studying camera recordings from stores and gas stations to track Luis's route on the day of Emilia's disappearance. But there was no clear data at this point. His alibi remained unconfirmed, and this fact did not allow investigators to finally narrow the circle of suspects. Antonio and Lia had already been released home by this time. The police recommended that they not leave the city and stay in contact. Despite the nervousness caused by the transfer episode, there were no longer formal reasons to suspect the spouses. The focus of the investigation now completely shifted to Luis Martinez. His name was mentioned in police reports, although no formal charges were brought against him. The investigators acted cautiously, avoiding hasty conclusions. By evening of the same day, the detectives received additional information about Luis's personality. He was described as a withdrawn person who often spent time alone. He did not have stable work and periodically came to police attention for minor law violations. The investigators recorded this data in reports, but still did not name motives and did not draw conclusions about his guilt. At the current stage of the investigation, this was premature and could harm the investigation. By the end of the day, the police still did not have precise information about Luis's movements on the day of Emilia's disappearance. Without this information, the investigation could not move forward, although circumstantial evidence was already persistently pointing specifically to him. The investigators understood that in the coming days they would have to completely figure out Luis's route, find out what connected him to the crime scene, and determine whether he was related to what happened. Until that moment, Luis remained in focus, but was still in the shadows. The investigation continued in complete silence and caution. With each hour, the situation became more complicated, and uncertainty increased. The police knew that any hasty statement could interfere with solving the case, so all steps were performed slowly and methodically. Several days after the police completely excluded the financial version, the investigation increasingly narrowed around Luis Martinez's personality. It was on this day that the investigators received evidence significantly strengthening suspicions against him. On the stone that was recognized as the murder weapon, Luis Martinez's fingerprints clearly appeared. The investigators presented this fact to him, but Luis categorically stated, "I was not at the beach that day." That same morning, the police conducted a repeat questioning of Luis's neighbors. One of them confirmed that on July 15th, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he saw Luis heading along the path that leads directly to Ventash Rock. The neighbor was sure of his words, although he noted that Luis behaved normally, not attracting attention in any way. After the neighbor's testimony, the investigators received permission to search Luis's dwelling. During the search of his house, a diary with several strange entries was found. These were observation notes about families who regularly vacationed at the beach, and the name Emilia was neatly circled in red. The police asked Luis a direct question about the meaning of these entries. He insisted that these were simple observations made out of boredom, and there was nothing suspicious in them. The investigators were not in a hurry to agree with this statement. The officers again interrogated Luis about his movements. He did not deny that he sometimes walked near the cliffs alone, but confidently stated that he did not remember the exact time of walks on the day of Emilia's disappearance. The cameras of the bar located nearby could not capture this part of the path, so there was no direct evidence of Luis's movement. On the same day, the police completely closed another false trail. Tomasz Gomes, the teenager who previously owned the blue windbreaker, was interrogated again. He explained to the police that he lost this jacket back in spring and had not seen it for a long time. Tomasz confirmed his words with a video call to his mother made at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on July 15th, which completely excluded his presence at the scene of the incident. The investigators became convinced that the piece of blue fabric had no relation to Emilia's disappearance, and this false lead was definitively closed. However, several hours later, Luis's neighbor contacted the police again. He remembered another detail that had not been mentioned earlier. Along the same trail, a little later than Luis, an unknown man in a black hood was walking. This statement caused a new wave of doubts, and the police began to verify this episode as well. The investigators quickly found the stranger. He turned out to be a tourist photographer who was indeed on the trail at that time. He willingly showed the police photographs he had taken on July 15th. From the images and metadata, it immediately became clear that this had no connection to Emilia's disappearance. Thus, this false lead was also officially closed. Meanwhile, the main evidence, Luis's diary, forced the police to study his personality and behavior more thoroughly. On the pages of the diary were clear, almost cold descriptions of how families spent time on the beach. But particularly detailed were the records about Emilia and her parents specifically. The diary contained no threats or any obvious plans, It was merely a dry and precise collection of information, but such an approach alarmed the investigators. The entries showed that Luis repeatedly and systematically observed Emilia and her family long before the incident. At the same time, Luis continued to insist on his complete non-involvement in the case. He assured the police that he had never approached Ventash Rock on that particular day and could not have left his fingerprints on the stone found there. Forensic experts examined the stone once more and confirmed that it was precisely the one used in committing the crime. Its weight was approximately 4 kilograms. The stone itself had been in place for a long time, but fresh fingerprints clearly indicated that it had been recently handled. The police requested additional DNA analysis to confirm or exclude Luis's connection to the stone. While awaiting the results, investigators intensified surveillance of Luis, maintaining complete caution in their public statements. On July 28th, the result came from the laboratory. The DNA match between Luis and the samples on the weapon turned out to be almost absolute. The probability of error was less than 1 in 10 million. This was an extremely important turning point in the investigation. From now on, the police had direct evidence of Luis's presence at the scene of the incident, and his assertion that he was not on the beach was definitively refuted. All false leads connected to other people, the fisherman, the teenager, and the photographer, were officially closed. The focus of the investigation now concentrated solely on Luis Martinez. The police proceeded to the next important stage: detailed reconstruction of the suspect's route and determining his motive. Luis was the only person to whom the investigation now had clear questions and concrete evidence. By this point, no outsiders were mentioned anymore, and all forces of the investigation were directed toward establishing the complete picture of his actions on the day of the tragedy. The following days were to become key in understanding why this happened and what Luis's motive was. After 7 months of investigation, analysis of dozens of documents, and examination of hundreds of details, the trial in the case of Emilia Silva's disappearance approached its final point. Absolute silence reigned in the courtroom when the judge announced the key moments of the case. Luis Martinez was the only one sitting in the special zone behind armored glass, looking at the floor in front of him. The court provided irrefutable evidence. GPS tracking data from Luis's mobile phone, obtained through his device's activity in cell towers. According to this data, on July 15th, Luis indeed moved along a route that passed near the family beach of San Miguel do Rio, and then clearly headed toward Ventash Rock. Experts showed in detail. Luis covered 400 meters across rocky terrain in approximately 8 minutes. This fit the police calculations and completely confirmed that he could have reached Ventash Rock at the right time. Now all doubts disappeared completely. Luis was there at the moment of the tragedy. The court also presented the results of fingerprint analysis. The fingerprints on the stone weighing about 4 kilograms, found at the scene of the incident, completely matched Luis's fingerprints. He no longer denied his presence, although he still categorically refused to explain the reason for his actions. The prosecutor read excerpts from Luis's diary, showing that he had been watching the Silva family for 2 weeks before what happened. The entries were dry, devoid of emotion, with clear recording of time and behavior of family members. But precisely, Emilia's name was highlighted separately, neatly underlined in red. Luis himself remained silent when asked about motives. He demonstrated no confessions or emotions. Then, an invited psychiatric expert who had worked with the defendant for several months took the floor. His report shed light on the possible reason for the crime. The expert explained that in 2020, Luis lost his daughter. This happened accidentally but had a severe impact on his mental state. After the tragedy, Luis became withdrawn and detached, developing a state of chronic depression accompanied by pathological envy toward happy families. The psychiatrist especially emphasized, Luis was not insane. He clearly understood his actions. But internal experiences and deep emotional crisis distorted his perception of reality and generated inexplicable aggression toward others' happiness. The Silva family accidentally became the object of his obsessive attention. The court then detailed a complete reconstruction of the incident. Luis appeared near the beach around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Around 4:15, he lured Emilia with a bright pinwheel toy and imperceptibly led her toward Ventash Rock. There, in a place hidden from view, the tragedy occurred. Luis delivered one precise blow with the stone, after which he left Emilia at the scene, counting on the evening tide, which was supposed to rise 30 centimeters and hide all traces. After this, Luis left the scene via the upper trail on the ridge of the cliffs. The bar's cameras did not cover this territory, which gave him a chance to leave unnoticed. Only thanks to the accidental discovery by the diver and prompt police work was it possible to quickly find traces of the crime. The courtroom listened to the verdict announcement with complete tension. Luis showed no emotions until the moment when the judge announced his punishment: 25 years imprisonment with mandatory psychiatric treatment. At this moment, Luis unexpectedly jumped up and tried to harm himself with a small blade hidden in his shirt sleeve. The guards instantly reacted, and the situation was brought under control. The incident was recorded by courtroom cameras and later thoroughly analyzed. The court was forced to declare a short recess, after which the session concluded with official confirmation of the verdict. After the verdict announcement, Luis was immediately transferred to a special medical facility, from where he was later delivered to a prison block with special supervision. No party disputed the court's decision. No appeal was filed. The case was officially closed and transferred to the police archive under the classification of restricted access. In the summer of 1992, 8-year-old Mathilde Jensen disappeared in the small Danish village of Aversi on the quiet street Skolevej. On this day, she came home from school to house number 14, but never arrived there. The search lasted months, then years, until gradually hope gave way to tenacious despair. Officially, the case was closed, but people did not forget. 32 years later, in the year 2024, workers demolished an old, half-destroyed barn on the same property. Suddenly, the floorboards broke beneath them, and the men fell into a shallow, secret cellar of 3 by 2 meters in size and slightly more than man height. The beam of a flashlight illuminated what had been hidden for decades only a few steps away from living people. On the damp wall were written in chalk the initials MJ and the year 1994. Below that, at the back wall, lay remains, and beside them, a school bag. But who could have left this inscription 2 years after the day Mathilde disappeared? Why did no one notice the cellar earlier, although it was literally in sight? Local police officers were the first to arrive at the scene. The bag that lay beside was neatly opened. Inside were school notebooks, written in uncertain childish handwriting and dated June 1992, exactly the time when Mathilde disappeared. The cellar proved to have been untouched for a long time. The workbench that covered the access from above had not been moved at least since 2011, when the former house owner, the carpenter Ole Sørensen, died. He was known throughout the village as a good-natured person who made and gave away wooden toys to the local children. Everyone knew him. Many trusted him. No one could have even thought that his property concealed such a secret. Or did he himself know nothing about it? The police immediately retrieved the archives from 32 years ago. The investigators' attention immediately focused on 2 versions that were almost forgotten at this time. The first was obvious and understandable: the former owner of the property, Ole Sørensen. His reputation and quiet life seemed to raise no questions, but the cellar with the remains and the inscription was located exactly on his territory. Ole himself had died 13 years ago, and now any investigation could only be based on preserved documents and neighbors' memories. The second version proved to be less clear and more disturbing. On the day of the disappearance, an unknown van was seen in the village, belonging to someone who was not from the area. Its description appeared in old statements, and some residents claimed that the driver had looked suspicious. These 2 versions immediately proved to be equal in the strength of suspicion and the weight of evidence. The van interested the police particularly strongly. From the archives, it could be reconstructed that the driver of the van had even been questioned at that time, but without consequences. The vehicle was remembered by children who were playing in neighboring streets. White cabin, worn blue sidewalls, dented license plates. That was exactly how they described the vehicle that had slowly driven past them on the day of Matilda's disappearance. The statements were too similar, too simple and too clear to be false. The police officers immediately made an inquiry to the Road Traffic Authority. There, the tachograph should be kept, a device that records the movement of the vehicle, its speed and stops. At first, it seemed as if the solution would be simple, but soon the investigators understood that they were dealing with a much more sophisticated and complex situation. It turned out that the tachograph had been kept all these years, but no one had checked it. While the device was brought to the laboratory, the police still hoped that the data from it would help to finally close one of the versions. However, shortly after the examination of the cellar and the bag with the notebooks, the forensic medical examiner shared unexpected and disturbing results. In his opinion, the remains had not been lying there since 1992, but much less, approximately since autumn 1994. This questioned absolutely everything: dates, witnesses' memories, and even the authenticity of the traces. How could a person who disappeared in 1992 leave an inscription with his own initials 2 years later, while already being in a secret room under the barn? If the expert was right, it meant that the story that seemed so understandable and simple concealed within itself another, much more complex truth. The police archives proved to be not just old papers. They contained answers that no one had paid attention to before. To clarify the situation, all forgotten names and circumstances had to be brought forth. The investigation returned again to the beginning, to old reports and people who lived nearby at that time, 32 years ago. The name Ole Sørensen now sounded completely different, not only as a good-natured carpenter, but as a person whose life and past could conceal much more than it seemed at first glance. This was only the beginning of a story that was to turn upside down the residents of Aversi's idea about what they knew about themselves, their neighbors, and possibly about the past of the village itself. Why did a childless carpenter need school notebooks with corrections by an adult hand? After the forensic medical examiner changed the usual picture of the investigation by dating the find in the cellar to autumn 1994, the police concentrated on the personality of the former property owner, Ole Sørensen. It was he who lived for decades in the house number 14 on Skolevej Street. It was he who had to know about the existence of the cellar that was secretly hidden under his own workshop. The search warrant for the house and adjacent buildings was immediately obtained. When the investigators entered, they were met by a house where time had stopped. Frozen, dust-covered furniture, neatly laid out tools and toys, as if the carpenter had only gone out for a few minutes and would soon return. But the strangest find were school notebooks that were found in the back part of the workshop. The notebooks were dated 1993 to 1994, and in each of them were corrections in adult handwriting, corrections regarding spelling, calligraphy, sometimes neat comments in the margin. For what purpose Ole Sørensen occupied himself with such things remained a mystery, because according to official data, he had never had a family or wards. A few days later, the police managed to discover in the bank archives of the city Sorø, which was 17 kilometers away from the village, another strange fact from the carpenter's past. For almost 2 years, beginning in spring 1993, Ole regularly bought every 6 weeks the antibiotic amoxicillin 250 milligrams. The prescriptions were issued by a doctor in the name of Anna Sørensen. At that time, Danish, pharmacies did not require providing the personal citizen number when buying medications. Therefore, verifying the reality of the existence of this Anna proved to be not simple. However, the municipal archives and resident registers showed clearly. Neither in Aversi nor in Sorø nor in other nearest municipalities had a person with this name ever been registered. The dosage of the antibiotic was such as is normally prescribed to younger age groups. This circumstance confused the investigation even more. For whom was Ole Sørensen buying medications? And who was hiding behind the invented name Anna Sørensen, whose existence could not be confirmed? The investigation had two obvious questions. Could the carpenter have secretly married, and was he hiding a wife in the house? Checking the documents at the municipal office completely excluded this possibility. No information about Ole Sørensen's marriage existed. Then another version arose. Perhaps Ole had secretly taken someone into care, whom he deliberately hid from foreign eyes. But here too, the official sources answered negatively. Neither adoption nor official guardianship were registered. Nevertheless, the residents of Aversi were questioned again. Among them was the neighbor Hans Larsen, who claimed that in autumn 1993, already at dusk, he had seen an unknown woman in the yard of the Sørensen house. He could not describe her in detail, since the distance to the house was more than 50 meters and the lighting was already insufficient. This prompted the investigation to briefly believe that the carpenter might indeed have led a secret life. But soon after thorough checking of the house and yard, the investigators found not a single personal item or other signs of a woman's presence. The neighbor's words were not yet confirmed by other evidence, and this version received no further development, remaining only an unconfirmed statement. Larsen's statements quickly began to appear doubtful. Several neighbors confirmed that Hans in those years often complained about poor vision and once confused another neighbor with a stranger. In addition, the thorough investigation of Ole's property and questioning of local residents gave absolutely no traces of an unknown woman's stay. Thus, the neighbors' statements proved to be only a false path that led to nothing. In parallel, the police concentrated on Ole's pharmacy trips to Sorø. Checking the bus routes and questioning the drivers confirmed that the carpenter regularly traveled by bus number 421 and then walked about 600 meters to the pharmacy. All this happened with unchanging regularity of 1.5 months and showed that Ole Sørensen was very interested in obtaining the medication. But soon the investigation received a result that became a new shock. Among the personal items found in the cellar next to the remains was a child's comb. The DNA analysis performed yielded an unexpected result. Biological traces were discovered on the comb that matched 98.7% with the dental record of Ole Sørensen himself. This fact became the turning point. How could biological material of the childless carpenter appear on a personal item found in a hidden room next to Matilda's remains? The experts immediately began searching for a connection between the strange prescriptions for antibiotics found in the Sorø Bank archive and the astonishing biological discovery. Now the investigation awaited the results of deeper laboratory examinations, hoping to receive a definitive answer to the question of what exactly Ole Sørensen hid in his life, and what secret Skolovej street in the quiet village of Aversi had guarded all these years. Why did Matilda's family deny her visits to Ole Sørensen's workshop, although school records testified to the contrary? To understand the story of Matilda's disappearance, the police had to look into her daily life before the moment of disappearance. Increasingly, the investigation's attention began to be drawn to a strange discrepancy between the words of Matilda's parents and the official school documents. The parents assured the police confidently and categorically that their daughter had never gone to Ole Sørensen's workshop. In an interview recorded in June 1992, Matilda's mother firmly insisted that her daughter had been afraid of machines and had even avoided the school workshop. But the records in the workshop lesson diary discovered by the investigation testified to the contrary. In these documents, it was clearly stated that the students of the school in the village of Aversi, among whom was also Matilda, visited house number 14 on Skolovej Street as part of special workshop excursions. The visits were not individual. They repeated with a periodicity of once a month. The workshop teacher, Erik Mortensen, confirmed this information and explained to the investigation calmly and confidently that Ole Sørensen willingly showed the children his workshop, taught basic skills in working with wood, and always observed all necessary safety measures. These facts raised serious questions about the Jensen family. Why did Matilda's parents deny with such persistence the obvious contact of their daughter with Ole Sørensen, despite clear evidence to the contrary? Perhaps they feared something or consciously avoided revealing some details of the past. In the protocols of repeated questioning in June 1992, Matilda's mother once again emphasized that her daughter had had panic fear of tools, noise, and dust, which were an inevitable part of woodworking. But the investigation immediately received several refutations. Matilda's classmates confidently told of their workshop visits and even mentioned that Matilde had been there with them several times. Nevertheless, the parents continued to confidently deny the visits, which put the investigation before the necessity of digging deeper. The investigators turned again to the school teacher, Erik Mortensen. He not only confirmed that he regularly brought students to Sørensen, but also explained that Matilda, although she was not the most active visitor, was present at every visit. Mortensen was obviously surprised by the categoricalness of the parents, and the police began to regard him with some caution for the first time. The investigation could not ignore that Mortensen had all the necessary conditions to be involved in what happened. He knew Matilda's route well, knew her family, and had keys to the school workshop, which gave him free access to all equipment. The police considered that such conditions could favor possible hidden intentions, and this suspicion required immediate verification. However, the teacher worked openly with the investigation, calmly provided the necessary documents, diaries, visit journals, and explained each of his actions. He was not nervous, did not avoid questions, although the investigation's attention could have frightened anyone. Nevertheless, all versions and suspicions had to be checked. The investigators began examining Mortensen's daily actions on the day of Matilda's disappearance, the 10th of June, 1992. An important and decisive circumstance in his favor was the telephone bill that arrived at the police. According to this data, it was Erik Mortensen who at 15:02 on that day was the first to inform the local police station that Matilda was missing on her usual route from school to home. This call sounded long before the worried parents themselves noticed their daughter's disappearance and reported it to the police. This fact not only confirmed Mortensen's words, but also removed a serious part of the suspicions from him. After checking this telephone call, the suspicions against the teacher were officially dropped, and the investigation's attention returned to the starting point, to Matilda's route. It became obvious that this information was known not only to teachers and parents, but also to someone else who could unnoticed observe the daily life of the family and their daughter. Now the investigation faced the task of understanding why the Jensen family stubbornly denied Matilda's visits to house number 14 and to Sørensen's workshop. The discrepancies in the parents' statements clearly indicated that they either intentionally hid something or had forgotten details that could prove to be extremely important. The suspicions toward Mortensen, the teacher who showed timely initiative and reported Matilda's disappearance, fell away completely. At the same time, new doubts arose in the case. Who else among the residents of the village of Aversi could know Matilda's exact route, her habits, and her daily schedule so well as to use this information? Precisely this contradiction became the turning point in the investigation and forced the investigation to return again to the village residents and to house number 14 on Skolavi Street. The confirmation of regular visits by students, including Matilda, to Ole Sørensen forced a reconsideration of the Jensen family's relationship with the carpenter, whose life now did not seem as simple and understandable as the neighbors had long believed. Thus, the events of June 1992, long before the tragedy, already contained within themselves that secret whose revelation years later would again disturb the peace of the small Danish village. Who exactly issued the prescriptions in the name of Anna Sørensen if such a woman had never existed? Moving further forward, the investigation once again returned to the archives of the pharmaceutical registers of Soru. Special attention was devoted to the prescriptions for the antibiotic amoxicillin 250 milligrams that were regularly issued in the name of Anna Sørensen in the years 1993 to 1994. The examination of the documentation showed that under each such prescription was the signature of Dr. Lotte Grønbæk, a well-known family doctor at that time. The questioning of Grønbæk shed light on long-forgotten details. The doctor remembered that in the autumn of 1993, a man indeed approached her, introducing himself as a father and bringing a sick girl for examination. He explained that the girl was very shy and did not want to get out of the car. Dr. Grönbeck, wanting to help and seeing nothing unusual in the request, conducted the examination directly on the back seat of the car. According to the doctor's statement, the girl had obvious signs of chronic respiratory infection. Grönbeck prescribed an antibiotic and issued a prescription, registering the patient provisionally as Anna Sørensen, since the accompanying man promised to provide the necessary data and CPR number later. The investigation inquired with the doctor about the reason for such an unusual examination outside the clinic. Grönbeck explained that the child's father was convincing and persistent. There was nothing threatening in his behavior. He said that the girl had panic fear of strangers and could not stay calmly in the clinic. The doctor, moved by compassion, decided not to insist and conducted the examination under such informal conditions. Grönbeck confessed that years later she herself not infrequently thought about that strange visit and about the patient whose identity was never documentarily confirmed. But in 1993, such informal practices in Denmark were not considered completely inadmissible. Meanwhile, the investigation carefully checked the records of the medical archive. The prescriptions issued by Dr. Grönbeck were genuine and legally correct, apart from the missing CPR number of the patient. However, this did not legally violate the norms of that time, and the doctor was well known as a conscientious and respected specialist. The investigators decided for safety's sake to check her contacts and biography to exclude the probability of her complicity. The additional questioning of Grönbeck and the verification of her previous contacts revealed no suspicious connections or peculiarities in behavior. The doctor enjoyed an impeccable reputation, was a respected specialist, had never before had problems with the law. Nevertheless, the question of whether she could have acted in agreement with the child's father was not yet finally clarified. The police decided provisionally to keep this version in reserve, since they had no weighty arguments against the doctor, but did not forget her involvement in the unusual situation. The next step was the complete exclusion of the second version that had long troubled the investigators. The experts could finally decipher the mechanical tape of the tachograph from the truck that was seen in the village of Aversi on the day of Matilda's disappearance. The careful analysis showed a clear result. The driver of the van was far outside Denmark, near the German city of Hanover, hundreds of kilometers from the place of disappearance. The false trail that seemed so promising at the start collapsed definitively. Now the police clearly understood that the case narrowed down to a single name: Ole Sørensen. The version of the long-distance driver proved to be nothing more than a memory error and coincidence. Initially, his presence in the village on the 10th of June 1992 seemed plausible, since several local residents remembered the van described by children. But now it became clear that the vehicle that remained in the memory of local residents was in no way connected with Matilda's disappearance. This episode was officially closed by the police, whereby the foreign driver was completely removed from the list of suspects. The investigation returned to the records of prescriptions for the antibiotic. Dr. Grönbeck not only confirmed the examination of the child in autumn 1993, but also gave the police additional information that convinced the investigators of the truthfulness of her words. She described the brand and color of the car. They matched the car registered to Ole Sørensen. At the same time, the police conducted a check of Sørensen's neighbors to confirm or refute the doctor's statements. However, none of those questioned remembered the strange visit to the doctor and any signs of the presence of a small patient at the carpenter's. Since the version with the truck driver was now definitively excluded, the entire attention of the investigation concentrated on Ole Sørensen's personality and his role in the events. The carpenter, who was known throughout the village as a quiet and benevolent person, now became the main and only suspect. The fact that he had a sick girl who was hiding under the name Anna Sørensen left the investigation no choice. Now it remained only to understand why Matilda first came to the basement in 1994, 2 years after the day she was first searched for. The investigation approached the point where answers to old questions raised new riddles that required further careful analysis of all details from Ole Sørensen's past and the secret that he might have kept for more than 30 years. 32 years later, the secret of Mathilda's disappearance is definitively solved. According to the NESC investigation, on the 10th of June, 1992, Ole Sørensen suggested to Mathilda that she come to his workshop to see a new lathe. She trusted the neighbor who always seemed harmless. But on that day, the path home ended in the Jordkelder, a damp underground room that was carefully hidden under the workshop. No one even suspected its existence. Mathilda spent the next 2 years exactly there. Sørensen taught her to read and write and tried to maintain an appearance of normalcy. As proof of this, the investigation presented the school notebooks that were previously found in the workshop. Systematic corrections and notes by an adult, made by Ole's hand, confirmed that he tried to teach Mathilda independently. At the same time, Mathilda suffered from frequent pneumonia attacks. Because of the constant dampness and cold of the basement, her health gradually deteriorated. To ensure treatment and keep her existence secret, Ole Sørensen turned to the local doctor, Dr. Lotte Grønbæk, using a fictitious identity, Anna Sørensen, supposedly his wife. Thus, he managed to regularly obtain antibiotics without unnecessary questions. Dr. Grønbæk fully confirmed these facts and added that the patient looked sickly and emaciated, but did not speak with her. The doctor was officially recognized by the investigation as a person who was mistaken and acted in good faith. Her complicity was completely excluded. The last doubts disappeared after the profound analysis of the evidence. Forensic experts confirmed that Ole Sørensen's biological material, discovered on the comb and blanket in the Jordkelder, clearly connected him with what happened in the basement. In addition, Mathilda's fingerprints were found on a wooden blank that was dated to 1993. This evidence stated that she was alive and helping him in the workshop, already after her official disappearance. Among Ole's belongings, receipts from a children's clothing store were found. The size of the clothing on the receipts completely matched Mathilda's presumed size at that time. Ole Sørensen's personal diary was also discovered, which definitively closed all questions. An entry from July 1994 laconically testified to Mathilda's severe condition. Hun hoster igen. She is coughing again. The most difficult task was the reconstruction of the last 48 hours of Mathilda's life. The experts modeled the conditions under which she found herself. The temperature did not rise above 7 degrees Celsius. The humidity was about 90%. Under such conditions, the weakened organism had no chance of recovery. In autumn 1994, the region was hit by a persistent wet cyclone that provoked the most severe pneumonia. According to the expert opinion, Mathilda Jensen died on the 2nd of November 1994 without waiting for rescue. At this time, literally 200 meters from Sørensen's house, a search by volunteers took place in October 1994. They carefully examined the nearest areas but heard no sounds or calls for help. In the Jordkelder, it was impossible to hear voices from outside, and the voice of a weakened person could not overcome the layer of earth and the boards with which the entrance was closed. This tragic detail emphasized how close the possibility was to discover Mathilda, and at the same time, how far away. More than 3 decades later, the investigation was able to put together the whole picture. The fact was established that the only culprit in this story was Ole Sørensen, who died in 2011 and bore no legal responsibility. He took forever the answer to the question about the motives that drove him to this crime, but the facts clearly pointed to his guilt and responsibility for the tragic outcome. Formally, the case was closed in memoriam since there was legally no one left to prosecute. The archive of the case, NESK-DK/Cold4724, was placed under strict secrecy. Access to it is limited. Thus, the authorities put a period to one of the most confusing and tragic stories of Danish criminology. The residents of the village of Aversi could not believe for a long time that the quiet and friendly neighbor was capable of such a thing. Now, 32 years after Matilda's disappearance, her story became not only a terrible memory of the past, but a symbol of how hidden the darkest sides of people who live next to us and seem harmless can be. For Denmark's law enforcement agencies, this became a difficult but important lesson. Some secrets are not revealed for years. And even when answers are found, it does not always bring relief, only a sense of completion.